If you wonder what the lessons from Exodus and Isaiah have to do with worker justice during this Labor Day weekend, I invite you to consider the following realities. More than 5 million people in this country have been out of work for longer than half a year. Actor Clint Eastwood was wrong Thursday night during his remarks to the Republican National Convention. It's not 23 million. It's more than 12 million people are unemployed in the United States. That's a slight exaggeration on his part. Most states offer 26 weeks of unemployment benefits. Remember, I said that more than 5 million people have been out of work for longer than half a year. After the financial crisis of 2008, a federal law extended benefits to 99 weeks. The people who enjoy that benefit are called the 99ers, or the 99-weekers. But millions of people have been cut out of work and have been off work for longer than 99 weeks. They have no unemployment benefits and cannot find work to pay for housing and for food and other basic needs. They cannot pay off their car loans, and so they risk losing their car. They cannot make their house payment, so they risk losing their house. They cannot, not because they don't want to work, not because they won't work. They cannot because they cannot find work. By the end of September, that's this month, the extended unemployment benefits will extend in the last 3 states that provide the 99 weeks. They are Nevada, New Jersey, and Rhode Island. You didn't think that Arkansas was among them, did you? Federal lawmakers will not extend the unemployment benefits to help the long-term unemployed survive. However, the biggest private banks received more than $700 billion in government money after the 2008 financial crisis. Teachers and support staff employees of the Pulaski County Special School District, one of the largest public school districts in Arkansas, are struggling to hold on to their collective bargaining rights to bargain concerning wages and working conditions and employment benefits. Immigrant workers are targets of abuse, mistreatment, and discrimination in our society and elsewhere around the world. Like the immigrant descendants of Jacob we read about in the lesson from Exodus this morning, immigrants are often viewed as threats to national security no matter how hard they work or how well they behave. Collective bargaining rights for public employees in Wisconsin and Ohio and Florida and Nevada and Indiana and Michigan have been attacked recently. The governor of Wisconsin blamed his big state budget deficit on the collective bargaining rights paid to public employees. You just know that those teachers and those police officers and those fire people are just the reason why Wisconsin can't balance its books. Blame it on the workers. Just a few days ago, police in South Africa shot and killed 34 mine workers during a demonstration for higher wages and better working conditions. Guess who got charged? 270 other striking mine workers have been charged with their murders. Not the police who shot them. The South African government is no longer all white, but the face of power is the only thing that has changed, not the economic realities of apartheid. That hasn't changed for workers or for other struggling people. These are just a few examples of what workers face today in the struggle for living wages and fair working conditions and to hold on to hard-earned health and retirement benefits. But many religious people do not see their struggles in the light of the biblical lessons about justice and liberation. Many religious people somehow fail to think about who the taskmasters are today. Many of us side with the enterprise emperors of our time, the pharaohs, the powerful people whose decisions and actions make life unjustifiably difficult for working people. So we need a sermon about worker justice and what that means during the 21st century. We need a sermon that calls us to confront the enterprise empire of the 21st century. We need a sermon that calls us to confront that enterprise empire in God's name. We need a sermon that encourages prophetic-minded and spirited people to stand up and bravely resist the enterprise empire mindset that treats working people as disposable and places more value on profits than people. We need to be reminded that wealth is not more important than the people who work. And so let me tell you what the first point is in this sermon. The first point is that God stands with the workers, not with the enterprise empire. The biblical story of the Exodus isn't sympathetic toward the Egyptian Pharaoh at all. The Pharaoh is the emperor. He's overseeing an enterprise, a major, call it a capital improvement enterprise in his society. The Exodus story is about how God worked to liberate working people from an oppressive regime. God sent Moses to send word to the workers that he wanted them free. He sent Moses to set the workers in Egypt free. According to the Bible, the empire of enterprise and the people who operate it cannot escape the justice of God. And the rest of the Bible presents divine justice from the perspective of working people. The Hebrew people of the Exodus story were immigrant construction workers. That's what they were. They were builders. God stood with the construction workers, not the empire that oppressed them. David, the heroic soldier king of Israel, was a shepherd. Recall that angels visited shepherds with good news about the birth of Jesus. God stood in the Bible with the farm workers, not the empires that oppressed them. Daniel and Isaiah were government workers who presented God's challenges to the empires of their time. God stood with Daniel. God stood with his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. We recall them as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but that was the name the empire gave them. Their divine names were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. God stood with them in their fiery furnace experience, not the empire. Jesus grew up in the house of Joseph, a carpenter. That's a working trade. His closest friends were fishermen, working people. God revealed grace and truth to us through Jesus, who was associated with working people, not the religious, commercial, and political emperors of his time and place. And so the highest and best biblical understanding about God and love and justice and liberation and truth are presented from the perspective of working people, not from the perspective of ruling empires, no matter what enterprise they're ruling. Jesus, as I said, was born and raised around workers. His first visitors were farm workers. His family became immigrant workers in Egypt after Herod tried to kill him as a baby. God stands with the workers and other vulnerable people, not the religious, the business, political, the military, the other emperors of any time and place. But we should also note that religious people can be insensitive to working people and the injustice they suffer. The lesson from Isaiah 58 shows how religious people and institutions can disregard injustices suffered by working people. Somehow we can get so caught up in our religious practice and performance and our religious habits and devotion. We can get so caught up in all that and go through our rituals and practices and think that God will ignore the oppression we allow workers and other vulnerable people to endure. But Isaiah 58, 1 and 2 suggests strongly otherwise. Listen to how God commands the prophet. Shout out. In other words, don't be mealy-mouthed about it. Get public. Get bold. Don't whisper. Talk loud. Do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. You ever hear a trumpet blow soft? You have to put a device on a trumpet to get it to go quiet. It's called a mute. You cannot make a trumpet make a silent, soft sound naturally. You have to suppress it. Announce to my people their rebellion, to the house of Jacob their sin. This is talk to church folk. Yet day after day they seek me and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that practiced righteousness and did not forsake the ordinance of their God. They ask of me righteous judgments. They delight to draw near to God. Listen to God's answer to that religious insensitivity about social justice, including justice in the workplace. In verses 3, 4, and 6 we read, "Look, you serve your own interest on your fast day and oppress all your workers." There it is. Boom. Straight off the Wall Street Journal editorial page. Nope. Right there in the heart of Scripture, in no matter what version or model you pick. "Look, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to strike with a wicked fist. Such fasting as you do today will not make your voice heard on high. Is not this the fast that I choose? To loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke?" The trap for religious people and for religion is to think and behave as though private and personal piety somehow can be divorced from how we treat people and handle power. That's the lesson we are confronted with in this text. That's the lesson that challenges us. And that's the lesson that God does not let us slide by. We cannot pretend that God doesn't care about working people. We cannot pretend that God turns a blind eye to how working people are treated. His eye is on the sparrow. He is on the workers too. As a matter of fact, this trap of pretending that we can behave as if we can divorce our piety from how we treat people and handle power is one of the first lessons we learn about in the Bible. You recall the lesson of Cain and Abel? Cain couldn't show up before God after murdering Abel and expect God not to know and be displeased about his injustice. Cain showed up for worship and acted as if God didn't know what happened to Abel or care. Just like Cain, we're mistaken when we think and act that way. What are you saying, preacher? I'm simply saying that religion and religious rituals are not a substitute for reality. Justice is always focused on the realities of what people do to and with others. God cares about what happens to workers. God cares when religious people behave as though we can sing and pray and praise and preach around the way workers and other vulnerable people are mistreated. Religious rituals and practices should inspire us to be more loving, more courageous, more prophetic agents of God's justice, not less so. So we only fool ourselves if we think we can regularly engage in acts of piety and devotion and somehow please God, yet be insensitive about injustice toward workers and abuse of power by the emperors of enterprise of our time and place. Employers and other powerful people have no license from God to renege on their promises to pay health and retirement benefits. Just because you ran the business in the ground doesn't mean you can take the retirement benefits from the people who have worked to earn them and use that to create a false profit margin for your shareholders. The profit motive doesn't excuse emperors of enterprise from the moral principles of honesty, fairness, and compassion. Workers owe employers honest effort. In return, employers owe workers fair pay and decent working conditions. Enterprise isn't fundamentally evil. Don't walk out of here saying the preacher is talking about preaching down business. No, I'm not. But enterprise does become evil when it is used to justify oppressive and otherwise unloving living. So as followers of Jesus, you and I are called to do more than sing and pray and praise and preach about God's love. We're called to confront the emperors of enterprise in the name of God's love. We're called, as the prophet was called in Isaiah, to shout out. Not in a quiet, we hate to bother you kind of voice, but in a loud trumpet kind of way. And be agents of liberation in the way of Moses to Pharaoh-like people and institutions, so that the workers of our time, like those of his time, can live with dignity and justice as children of God. We are not called by God to live with our head in the sands or in the clouds. Inspired by God's grace and truth, we're called to live with eyes wide open, sensitive hearts, and ready hands that demand justice for workers and other vulnerable people. And if we won't live that way, our singing and our preaching and our devotions and our other pious behavior aren't worth much to God or anyone else, including ourselves. And the last thing I'll tell you is that we have to decide whether to live for God as prophets or for the enterprise empire as pawns. We have to decide whether we're going to be God's prophets or the pawns of the enterprise empire. According to the Exodus story, Moses was born to an immigrant community of oppressed workers. It matters how you read Scripture, you understand. If you just read Moses was born and his family was in Egypt and they were slavery and they were Pharaoh, you miss the point. This was an immigrant people. These were working class people. Although the empire of his time considered his people a threat, the prophetic midwives among his people refused to go along with an idea about killing all the male babies. In other words, the idea about kill the workers' babies didn't pass because there were some prophetic-minded people who said the workers' male babies deserved to be protected. His immigrant working family took affirmative acts to protect him from being discovered and killed by the government as an infant. Although Moses was later raised as the privileged child of the Egyptian empire, he had somehow been nurtured well enough by his Hebrew mother to understand love and justice and understand it was bigger than what the empire wanted. Anger moved Moses to kill a man who was abusing one of the immigrant workers. I'm not going around here telling you to go kill somebody. Don't read that the way. Don't hear me saying the preacher's telling us to go kill people because they're not treating the workers right. However, this does reflect a sensitivity on Moses' part about the injustice of abuse of power. That violent act of killing a man led Moses to become a fugitive. But that's not how the story ends. We remember Moses not because he was a fugitive who killed a man. We remember Moses because he eventually returned to Egypt as God's prophet of liberation to challenge the empire of enterprise. Moses could have become a pawn of the emprise. He could have become a pawn of the empire. He was raised in the empire. Instead, he became God's prophet of liberation to challenge it. What are you saying, preacher? You and I are also called to become God's prophets of liberation, not unwilling pawns of the free enterprise empire. No, we are not. We are not mere pawns of the empire. We are followers of Jesus, not Adam Smith, not the Wall Street Journal, not the American Enterprise Institute, not American Prosperity, or some other manifestation of the enterprise empire. Make no mistake about it, that empire is real and active, Religion must inspire us to be also more real and more active as prophetic agents of God in challenging it. What does that mean, preacher? It requires that you and I confront oppressive workplace practices and policies as God's prophetic agents of liberation, not ignore it as if we're pawns of the empire. It requires that you and I challenge the empire of our time and place according to divine principles of God's love and truth and peace and justice. It requires us to boldly and faithfully encourage workers to be faithful in work and fearless in demanding compensation that provides a living income for honest work in safe conditions. It requires that we challenge employers and other would-be agents of the empire to not use workers as scapegoats for employer mismanagement and fraud or greed or anything else. Let it be said that when working people are mistreated, we challenge their employers about it and demand justice for our neighbors no matter where they were born, how they got here, how they look, or what their backgrounds may be. Let it be said that you and I are demanding that workers provide employees living wages, safe working conditions, and health and retirement benefits because that is what they deserve as children of God, no matter what the enterprise empire thinks about it, or no matter what their priests, and you know the enterprise empire has some priests and preachers too, in their lust for profit say about it. Let it be said of us as was said of religious people in another time. Let it not be said of us as was said of religious people in another time. Look, you serve your own interest on your fast day and quarrel among yourselves. Look, you serve your own interest to oppress all your workers. Look, you fast only to quarrel among yourselves and to fight and strike with a wicked fist. Instead, let it be said that we chose to be God's prophetic people of worker justice, challenging the 21st century enterprise empire, to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke. And then our light will break forth like the dawn. Then our healing will spring up quickly. Then our vindicator will go before us, and the glory of the Lord will be our rear guard. Then we can call, and the Lord will answer. Then we can cry for justice, and the Lord will say, "Here I am." Amen. Let us ponder going